Yes, welcome back to another edition of the Whistle Blows podcast with myself, Connor at Levy 1882, and Billy. How are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Obviously, we did the show last night, which I thought was really good. And then Deloitte Money League dropped at midnight. So, being a sort of finance geek, I had a quick look at that. Obviously, released a quick short video, but we thought it was worth jumping on a show today just to jump into the detail a little bit more, didn't we, mate?
Yeah. So what is just for anyone that doesn't know, what is a Deloitte Money League then, and how does that work? And if it work, how often is it published?
Yeah, so this is basically, look, I'll pull it up on screen. Let's see if that works. There we go. Um, so Deloitte Money League, they release this annually, and effectively they get sort of early sight of the revenue numbers for all of the sort of richest clubs in the world, most of which obviously are in Europe, and certainly all of the top 20, which are shown on the screen here, are all based in Europe. Morning, everyone, to the chat. This is our first daytime show, so it's nice to see we're getting some people in already. But yeah, effectively posted once a year, and this is for the 24-25 year. So this would effectively for Tottenham have been the year that we finished 17th and won the Europa, right? So last year, so not this year's numbers with Champions League money. So you'd expect this to go up, and it's missing some details because it's just purely revenue, and they show a bit on wages, which we'll come on to. So we'll have to wait for the full accounts, which Tottenham normally publish end of March to get a real sort of overview, and obviously we'll do a detailed show at this point, but it's good to get early sight of where things were heading for 24-25. And I think, as predicted, and as we sort of said on our video that we released last night, interesting to see Tottenham releasing record revenues, as it says here, so 672 million euros, which is about 565 million quid. Arsenal, Liverpool, and United also looking like they're going to have record revenues for that year as well. So a lot of money in football.
Yeah, that's so Tottenham have posted a record revenue basically. So so I guess like, what do you think that means in terms of like the Lewis family and everything like that? Sort of, is there essentially plenty of money to be spent in? Is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, look, revenue don't necessarily always translate across to how much profit the club is making, or and to be honest, football clubs and Tottenham for the last few years haven't actually made a sort of profit on record, mainly because of the depreciation that we have on the stadium. So we charge about sort of 60-70 million quid depreciation, which isn't real money. It's basically just saying, effectively the stadium's getting older. We should recognise a charge to recognise that that it is getting older. And then obviously cash flow is a big thing as well. But I think what this does show is, and we spoke a little bit about it on the video last night, is what a financial beast Tottenham is as a football club, and how we're not really matching that ambition on the pitch itself, right? So, continue to be ninth in this list, above Chelsea quite significantly, almost 100 million euros above Chelsea. Obviously, this, as I say, is in a year that we finished 17th as well, right? So in terms of the Premier League position money, we lost out on a huge amount there. So you normally pay something like 3 million quid per position in the Premier League. So obviously, by virtue of finishing 17th, even if we'd finished seventh, that was an extra sort of 30 million or so that we'd missed out on. And unlike, the top seven there, and most of the clubs in this top 20, obviously ourselves, United and Chelsea being the exception, Champions League money is the big ticket, and we didn't have Champions League either. So, to sort of hit these numbers in a year where we didn't have Champions League and finish 17th is pretty impressive from a financial standpoint. But I appreciate fans won't be particularly interested in that because it isn't translating to what the Lewis family and ENIC are doing off the pitch.
And before we go into the top 20 there a little bit, Tottenham are almost in a bit of an island there, aren't they? They're sort of a long way in front of Chelsea, but a long way in front of Man United, a long way behind Man United, and we're in our own little island there, aren't we? Really? Do you think? I mean, we will probably talk about this later on in the show, but how big is that gap to bridge to move up? Is that feasible in the future, or do you think we're about where we're always going to be for the foreseeable?
No, I think Arsenal's probably the best example to look at how they've sort of managed to jump up. So they've had, since 2022, they've had about 90% revenue growth. So certainly for the last few years before the Cronkies suddenly decided to take an interest, Tottenham were always above Arsenal, right? Or for the last few years, we're above Arsenal in this. So I think in terms of like the base financials, there's no reason why we couldn't get up to sort of sixth or seventh. But in order to do that, we would need to start being more successful regularly on the football pitch, right? And getting Champions League money. I think, Nicholas has asked this question about we must be going even bigger in 25, 26. That is absolutely right. So we'll have the Champions League money coming in. We should get to, as I say, this is in euros, but in pounds, we're about £565 million. I would expect with the performance we're currently at in terms of league position, and depending on how far we get in the Champions League for 25, 26, we should be getting to sort of 635, 640 million at least, with the scope for that to go even higher. Arsenal at sort of 690 million pounds. So, yeah, I think until we start regularly getting in the Champions League again, because not only do you then get the sort of big ticket item in terms of the Champions League money itself, sponsors grow significantly as well. And that's what you're seeing really for these top 7 clubs. The commercial revenues, and it's good timing, Rich, for your question. The commercial revenues grow even further, right, as a result. And so the reason why our commercial revenues maybe aren't as high as they could be is just those sponsors. So you're right, we've got all of those non-footballing events like the concerts, etc., which definitely bring it up a bit. But sponsors like to sponsor the most successful clubs, and unfortunately, we haven't been there for a couple of years. Cut out then, Bill. I don't know whether my connection went a bit. If you just
that was mine. Yeah, I think that was mine as well. Yeah,
all right.
Good. Yeah, so just looking at the top 20 broadly before we move on to Tottenham in general, anything to take from the top 20 clubs? I mean, I'm surprised to see West Ham there, to be honest, but I guess that's how big a Premier League is. Anything to take from the top 20 in general before we move on to Tottenham?
Yeah, I think a couple of interesting points. I think the first one is, yeah, I mean, look, 9 out of these 20 are from the Premier League. I think it's 15 out of the top 30 are from the Premier League. So you're definitely seeing the massive growth in the Premier League money starting to flow through into this.
We're seeing that in real terms now with 5 out of the 6 teams in the Premier League are in the top 8 of the Champions League as well. So do you think the sort of Premier, I mean, it's already been discussed loads at Lev, but is the Premier League essentially monopolising European football at the moment?
It is, and yeah, I mean, look, it's money driven, but I suppose there is a bit of a difference here, which was probably a bit of a surprise to some people, because given what we just said in terms of that Premier League dominance, the top 4 are all foreign though. So it's the 4 big boys in terms of Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, PSG. Now, obviously, PSG is a bit of a weird one. They've managed to really ramp up their commercial revenues, hugely. They don't necessarily make that much in terms of match day revenue, but huge in terms of sponsors, obviously, with the Qataris owning them and then managing to make those sponsorship deals. And then also because they've been successful, as I say, you've got that. What you've also got coming through for those top 4 is the Club World Cup, as well. So you've got some of that money coming in, not all of it, but some of it. So I think if you stripped out the Club World Cup, you would probably see a bit more of a tighter gap, or perhaps some, the 4 English clubs in positions for 5th to 8th being a little bit higher. But yeah, I think I think this is something that we're going to continue to see over the next couple of years, because the Premier League is so big now.
And guys, keep the questions coming in the chat. I'm starring them all. We will ask them all to Connor by the end of the show, so keep them coming. Just a random quick question, just to put you on the spot. I don't know how much you know about them in general. Barcelona. So obviously their records are right high there, second in the league, second in the table, but they have very much reported finance trouble. So how does that work? How come they can't essentially spend money on transfers, or is it like that weird registration thing that they have? Do you know what's going on there?
Yeah, their picture's starting to get a bit better. So definitely over the last few years, Barcelona really struggled. With they had really high wages, really high costs, and so they were struggling massively in terms of being able to then spend more on transfers. They were at big risk of sort of breaching the European rules as relates to how much you can spend on your sort of transfers and wages. I think in 2021 their wage to revenue ratio was about 84%. So if you think ours is at 44% now for this year, almost double ours, and that's on a much bigger revenue number as well. So the amount they were spending on wages was massive. It was sort of 500 million euros or something like that, right? So really, really significant. I think what they have managed to do over the last couple of years is bring that down quite significantly. So for the latest year, their wage to revenue ratio is now 54%. So they've brought that down sort of from 84 to 54 over the last 5 years. And revenue is up sort of 27% on the previous year. So I think they're now in a place where things are starting to get a bit better for them. You're on mute, Bill.
And then another question before we go into Tottenham in general. I was chatting to a Newcastle fan recently who said it won't be long before they sort of catch up with these guys. And then Aston Villa are sort of in the mix as well. Villa and Newcastle there. Do you think how long is it potentially going to be before? Is it possible that they could sort of breach the top 10 in the next few years? Those two clubs. I know Newcastle are almost trying to copy our model, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it's going to take a little bit of time. I think it depends on the extent to which they get Champions League again and start to get that more regularly. I think this year, which is included here, I don't think Newcastle had Champions League, so but they still managed to grow revenue on the previous year when they did. So they're starting to get bigger in terms of those commercial deals. I think the problem for Newcastle and Villa is the rules are more stringent now, both in terms of what you can sort of announce from a sponsorship perspective, but also obviously what you can then spend on transfers compared to perhaps when Man City and Chelsea did it and PSG. And so, I think it will take probably a little bit longer than it took those guys. I think Newcastle probably have cheated less than you might have expected them to do so as well. They haven't done any of the stuff around selling women's teams or hotels or any of that type of stuff. I don't know whether they could even got a hotel to sell, but they've tried to keep fairly reasonable in terms of where they are on wage to revenue and all of those types of things. So it seems like they're trying to do it in a more sustainable way. And as you say, the big thing for them is going to be trying to build the infrastructure up so that they can then have more revenue to support what they want to do, no doubt, from a spend perspective.
Just because it's been a big topic recently with how well Aston Villa are doing in particular, a lot of talk about the big six and our Tottenham in it, but this is it, right? This is what the big six is, and this is why they're the big six, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, people love to do it. They did it to Arsenal a few years ago when Leicester apparently replaced Arsenal when Arsenal were finishing eighth. Look, the big six is about money ultimately, and the gap between those clubs that have a lot of money and make a lot of money for the Premier League versus the other 14. And so, yeah, certainly.
So what we're actually saying is Chelsea should be more worried than us at the moment.
From that perspective, yeah. I mean, look, people like to read into it that it's actually about, on pitch performance or trophies or history or whatever. And actually, look, I mean, even if you look at trophies, those six are also, in terms of total trophies, the big six for trophies as well, fan base and of course money. So yeah, I mean, it's all a bit of a nonsense argument, and I would I'd probably say as well, like it's done us no favours being part of the Big Six, because we get thrown into these conversations about the Big Six cartel. I don't think we get any refereeing decisions or anything like that in our favour if you're talking about on-pitch stuff. And then from an off-pitch perspective, again, we get lumped in whenever Villa or Newcastle like to have a little moan about the cartel and how they can't break into it, and how, but we'd love to see Tottenham have the sort of ambition Villa and Newcastle have got, relative to our own numbers. And I'm sure we'd be in a very, very different position.
And yeah, that's exactly what we've been talking about a lot recently. Kitty Martin we're in the Big Six, but we definitely don't act like it. I think that's a really good point to end that bit on. Right, so let's talk Tottenham then. So they posted a record revenue. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I think, look, we are, as I said, we've gone from sort of 528 to 565. That's going to, in pounds, that's going to go up further in the next year. I think, interestingly for us, commercial is making up a significant part of that, as it does for all clubs. For us, it's nearly 50% of our revenue now. So, it shows the importance from a revenue perspective of those non-footballing events, as Rich was talking about earlier in the chat. So, getting a lot from those concerts, sponsorship deals, all of that type of stuff. Where we need, and match day revenue obviously is fairly significant as well, I think. But we need to keep filling out the stadium, and unfortunately, given the on-pitch performances at the moment, the stadium attendances are falling a little bit. So you're probably losing a bit there. But the big one where we need to is what Deloitte call broadcasting revenue. But basically, that is what you're getting in terms of TV rights plus some of the sort of Champions League deals and all of that type of stuff. That's where we need to see that significant growth for sure. And as I say, we're only going to get that by actually climbing up the Premier League table and being in the Champions League regularly. So yeah, it's a good set of numbers. I think probably what's quite interesting for people as well, if I just bring up this next one on wages. So I think wages is obviously a massive hot topic for us, because although it's definitely the case, our sort of transfer spend, albeit badly, has grown over the last sort of 5-6 years since we moved into the stadium. We'll come back to this in a second, because we've got lots of context points as to why that isn't quite as significant as it's sometimes painted. Wages, this is a bit small, so sorry if people can't see it properly on their phones or whatever, but you'll see second year running, we're out of the Big Six in terms of totality on wages. So it's grown from about 222 million to just shy of 250 million, which I suspect is mainly as a result of sort of the Europa League bonuses coming through and that type of thing, and perhaps a couple of bigger contracts. This won't include the likes of Xavi Simons, Paulinho, Muani or Romero's new contracts, because they'll come through in the following year's numbers. But I think this is pretty disappointing, Bill, again, to see us below Villa and to see that huge gap from us to the rest of the apparent Big Six. We're the best part of 100 million less than the rest, which is really disappointing to see.
We always point to this as being a real indicator in success. Is there any surprise to see the top three teams there, other teams that have scooped up all the trophies the last 3-4 years?
No, absolutely. I think this is, look, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, right? United, for example, have spent a lot of money and spent it badly, and so that does happen. But generally, the trend is going to be the more you spend on wages and transfers, and particularly wages, I think, is the best barometer of success. The more successful you're going to be as a football club, right? And I think you're right. You look at those top ones. I mean, the gap is massive. You look at the difference between us and Liverpool. And Liverpool are always sort of heralded as this club that's run really, really well and sustainably. Don't spend a huge amount on transfers, but you do see what they're spending on wages.
Almost double what we spend, essentially.
Yeah, it's crazy. And look, the other thing I would say as well, this is total wages, right? So this includes your playing staff plus your non-playing staff as well, right? So obviously the wage bill for the players will be less than this, but what I would say is Tottenham's non-playing staff wage bill is quite a bit bigger than Newcastle's as well, because of the fact that obviously we're a much bigger club, so we need to have a lot more operational staff. So if you actually, the player wage bill is about 71% normally, 71 to 75%, depending on the sort of size of club you are, with smaller clubs being higher. So I would actually say that Newcastle would be above us as well if you were just talking about footballers. So that puts us at eighth, right, in terms of the wage bill, which is just, yeah, I mean, for the size we are, is disappointing and shows why we are where we are, I suppose.
We have seen a slight change in the last couple of windows. Obviously, we've got Gallagher coming in, who's probably on a higher wage. We've got Xavi Simons, Mawani, Palhinha, and obviously it was mentioned in Vinay's statement as well. Do you think the club are finally doing something about this?
I think they've woken up a bit to it for sure. I mean, we've got a massive, massive way to go. And as I say, for 25, 26, because the revenue number is going to be so much higher with the Champions League, our wage to revenue ratio will still probably be in this sort of ballpark where we are right now. And so, yeah, just to sort of confirm where that is for people. Again, you can't see this. StreamYard doesn't bring it up too big, but wage to revenue ratio has moved up from 42 to 44%. As I say, probably as a result of sort of Europa League win bonuses and that type of thing. I would guess for the next year, it will probably still be in that mid-40s range because of the revenue growth. So even with those higher wages, I think no one is asking us to get to the sort of ridiculous Villa numbers, where, for 1 year they were sort of 90, 80, 90%. I think they're now in the 70%. I think most fans are reasonable and probably just want us to get to sort of the 50 to 60% range, which is where most clubs are. I think, again, Tottenham will be the lowest in the Premier League at 44%. I'm pretty certain once we see the full numbers. If not the lowest, will be the second lowest. Maybe a Brentford or someone might be lower. And we're the lowest in the Deloitte Money League as well, amongst the top 30 richest clubs at 44% wage to revenue ratio. So until that starts to increase, and as you say, maybe the club are finally waking up to it, I just don't see how we're going to ever be able to really, really compete. Real Madrid are also at 44%, and sometimes people say, "Oh, Real Madrid are only 44% as well," or whatever. But the difference is Real Madrid's revenue is, near enough £1 billion.
1.1 billion, wasn't it, in the thing? Yeah.
Yeah. So
euros. Yeah.
So it sort of caps out at a point, right? What you expect to see is once your revenue gets to sort of the Real Madrid levels, the wage to revenue ratio will go down because there's only so much you can spend on players, right? Because there's a market and that caps out. For us, we absolutely should be in the 50 to 60% range right now, if we wanted to show any sort of level of ambition.
And just on Rob McKenzie, we did mention him on last night's show, didn't we? So go have a little watch of that because, yeah, we completely agree with that for sure, Ozzy, definitely.
Yeah, we did, and look, and that's worth mentioning, right? We could talk about the finances till we're blue in the face, and obviously, I love doing that, but and there's lots of things we're getting wrong from this standpoint, but it's also really, really important. And Rob McKenzie's a big part of this with Langer and everyone else involved in the sort of analytics and scouting department of getting recruitment right. So the money that you do spend, so we need to be spending more. We need to be spending more on wages, but also the money we do spend, we need to be spending better than we have done because we have wasted a whole host of money as well.
One thing I've found surprising about Tottenham is our wage for players is thank you very much, Nico, by the way. Our wage for players is lower than what it should be, but we pay managers a great deal of money. Like it's rumored that Thomas Frank is the third highest paid manager in the league at the moment. That's not confirmed, but it's somewhere around that bracket anyway. Obviously, we paid Conte 15 million a year at the time. We generally speaking, we pay managers loads of money. Where's the sort of manager wage, and is that reflected in different kind of? Is that reflected in a different part of the wages? Is that reflected in a different part of the finances?
No, that will be in these numbers. So that will be in the total wage number and will be in the wage to revenue ratio. So even with the fact we're paying typically more for managers, we've still got this pretty poor outlook overall. I think with the manager thing, you're right. I mean, look, I think with Conte, it was a last Friday. Well, what we thought was going to be a last Friday dice, but Levy trying to save his own skin after a lot of pressure on him. Similar with Mourinho replacing Poch. I mean, it is baffling though. What is the point?
And is that
What
sort of showing how
in
backwards that we are, that we overpay for managers but underpay for players, and we're expecting managers to do miracles?
This is it, yeah. Exactly. It's completely pointless, isn't it? You bring in a manager on 15 million quid a year and then back him with Longley on loan instead of signing a centre back when he plays three at the back. It's completely at odds. I mean, the other thing that we have done historically as well, it's a point I've made a lot, is it's ironic that when it comes to paying wages for players, we're tight, but we were never tight with how much we used to pay Daniel Levy, who was always the highest paid director in the whole of the Premier League, on top of the money that obviously you walk away with when they actually come to sell the club. So yeah, it was a different viewpoint we took on that.
And are signing on fees included in wages, or is that a different kind of different finance?
Yeah, it's normally separate, I believe. It's a good question. I've not actually checked it. I know. I think it's consolidated with the rest of the transfer fee and then amortized. But let me check that. I'll come back to that. Good question. Cool. But to be honest, we don't give a lot, and on agent fees as well, Nicholas. We are historically an awful payer of agent fees as well, comparably to other clubs. So I haven't got it to hand.
Do you think that was a historic Daniel Levy trait?
I think so for sure. I think, look, I've tweeted it before. We are we're one of the lower relative payers when it comes to agent fees. Obviously, everyone in the chat, and this will be certainly my view as well. I don't think anyone likes the fact that agents are managed to take that sort of cream off the top. It's a bit of a parasite style job, isn't it? But at the same time, it's part and parcel of football. You have to pay agent fees, and we are tight when it comes to that. And it makes you wonder, is that the other reason we've missed out on players in the past, Bill? Right? Not only are we, a shit payer when it comes to wages relatively, but unfortunately, if we're also not willing to pay that money on agents, they're going to encourage their players to join other clubs, I'm sure.
Yeah. So the posted record revenues, obviously we've spoken a lot about the wages. What is Tottenham's actual revenue made up of then? So how have they increased this year, not compared to last year, say?
Yeah, so this you sort of got the breakdown here. So commercial, as I said, about half at 330 million euros. Then broadcasting, which is made up of sort of the TV deals, that type of stuff, and then match day, obviously tickets. So you've got that increase on match day from the previous year, because obviously we only played 41 games total in the previous year, and I think it was only, what would it have been, 20 home games, because we had we had the 19 Premier League home games plus Burnley at home, maybe Man City as well, maybe 21 league games last year. So you got that natural increase there. Match, and then when you come into broadcasting, that's actually down slightly. So we were at 195 million euros in the year before. It's gone down to 192, and this is basically by virtue of, even though we won the Europa and got the money for winning the Europa, obviously it's nowhere near as significant as the Champions League. But this is basically by virtue of the fact we went from 5th to 17th, right? So you lost the best part of 30 million just as a result of that, which does show, when people talk about seasons being write-offs and that type of thing, every league position does matter, which also then makes it nonsensical what we're doing in this January transfer window, Bill, right? Because the difference that signings could make just in terms of, I mean, we're not a million miles away from Europe somehow still, because the sort of general quality of the league is shit. But, we were speaking last night about a Lookman, for example. They're talking about a 1 or 2 million loan fee for that, well, one league position gets you more than that, right? So this is the sort of short-termism I think we've had at Tottenham, whereby we have basically tried to save pennies here, there, and everywhere, and actually it's lost us money in the longer run as well. And so, yeah, I think the comparison, as we were saying earlier, and I hate talking about it, and I'm sure I'll get slagged off for doing so, is Arsenal, because in 2022, as I say, they were below us on these numbers. They've managed to grow their revenue by 90%, basically by virtue of the Cronkies actually starting to give a fuck about football. The Cronkies have injected over £300 million of their own money to get them competing again. And it's that old age saying, speculate to accumulate. They've proven what can happen, and so that's what we need to do.
And for me, that was always a major blind spot of Daniel Levy, is that just a little bit more speculating, a little bit more risk taking would have had massive, commercial revenue improving as well. Like if you obviously
Exactly.
you're constantly in title races like Arsenal and constantly in the Champions League and deep in the Champions League as well. They're obviously top by miles in the group stage at the moment, and will continue to be. I can't believe that was such an incredibly financial literate guy. That was such a blind spot for him, right? Like he didn't see that just a little bit more risk taking would have had these massive rewards, and now Arsenal are reaping it, right?
Yeah, and look, I've had these debates a lot with people, because I think a lot of people who look at the finances, or certainly the general media view, is what a fantastic businessman Daniel Levy was and what a great job he's done. Now, my argument has always been, to some extent, the one thing they did really well is they managed to buy the club at a fantastic time, right? And what that meant is they rode that wave, to be honest, in terms of Premier League money booming, right? And so some of it was luck rather than the exact decisions they made. Fair play to them. Obviously, they got in at the right time, as I say. We were in the top sort of 6 or 7 clubs for a revenue perspective before ENIC joined as well, right? And we were the 4th most successful in terms of trophies. So it wasn't like there was this drastic change. I think sometimes, you hear people talk as if we were like Fulham before ENIC took over or something, right? We were still a huge, huge football club, both financially and in terms of trophy success. So, I think for me, it definitely was an absolute blind spot. The stadium naming rights, someone asked, a couple of people made the comment there, that's 6 years now without any stadium naming rights. You call that sort of, even if you were conservative and called that 20 million a year, that's 120 million pounds they've missed out on over that period, which then, if you sort of think about how you can amortize that for transfers, that's a huge, huge amount of money again that they've missed out on by probably being too bolshy with how much they were asking for. So there's loads of mistakes they've made, not backing Poch significantly, and then doing the rebuild at a time when transfers were more expensive, and always sort of shopping in that second tier of people as well. How much money's been wasted there? So there's been a number of business mistakes, as well as on the pitch mistakes, manager payoffs, as Mike has just said as well. A whole host of things.
And if they got a stadium right deal for say a number of years, would they be paid in a lump sum, or would they get paid yearly? How does that generally work?
It depends on the exact commercials that are agreed. I would be surprised if anyone would necessarily agree to do it, from their business standpoint, in one lump sum. So you'd expect that to sort of flow through annually.
But that is a sort of a quick win of, say 25 million plus. That's when we talk about how we've improved our revenue, what was it, 10, 15 million euros, whatever, 20 million euros odd from last year? That would be another 25 on top, right?
I mean, this is a good point from Sam as well. You've got the training. A lot of clubs are now selling the training ground rights, so you'll see it. He's right. Arsenal have done this, so you'll see it a lot when Arsenal announce a transfer or something. They always do it in the room, and it's got the sponsor on the back there, because they've sold the training ground rights, as Sam says. Man City obviously have done it, but effectively to themselves, because it's Etihad. But yeah, you're starting to see that more regularly. So that's definitely somewhere else we can grow. I mean, Colin's just raised this point about shirt sponsor and kit maker. I think in terms of AIA, we're not actually that far away.
One more
from
year,
the
isn't
others,
it?
but
One more year after this one.
one more year, exactly. And to be honest, the money side of things is not a million miles away from the other big clubs, but you'd hope. Well, it's going to somewhat depend on us being successful again, because they're going to be negotiating that shirt sponsor at a time when maybe we're not going to have European football and all of these types of things. And so again, it all comes back to, you want to grow all of these revenue streams, you need to be successful on the football pitch as well. And yeah, I think we'll all be happy to see the back of the red AIA, won't we?
I remember when I was in school, when I was a football fan, these sort of shirt sponsors used to change every season, almost, for some clubs, and it felt like that at Tottenham a bit as well. But typically now they're really long-term deals, aren't they? So our next one, I imagine, will probably be locking in for like 10 plus years, right? That's what they normally do now, right?
Yeah, it will be. And just quickly on Nike before I address this point.
Isn't Nike like 30 years or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, the Nike deal for us looks worse than it actually is. I mean, you can see this. We actually make a higher proportion of the merchandising sales outside of the main sort of sponsor sales. Certainly when Sonny was here, when we were selling a lot of kits, we had a higher sort of percentage of the proportion, and you could see that in the UEFA landscape report, if anyone wants to have a look, if they're a loser like me. So it was never quite as bad as it was portrayed, but yeah, Nike did manage though to get in at a good time with us, because it was sort of negotiated on a long-term basis. So we do, hopefully that will get bigger. Just on this point from Eureka, so she says, does it not suit the host agenda to highlight that ENIC has not taken £1 out of the club via dividends? Now they have actually taken out a bit of money in terms of dividends, but that's also completely normal for football clubs. United are the exception rather than the rule, in that the Glazers were taking money out in dividends. So it isn't like they're doing anything that's different to any other football club. And what I would say as well is Daniel Levy didn't need to take out any money in terms of dividends, because he was paid as an employee. And so, he was paid about 50 million or so over the time he was director. Now, obviously, he did a job for that, so did deserve some of that. But as was said earlier, was paid significantly more than any other director. And then also ENIC, let's not get the violins out for them. They bought the club for about 90 million. They've put in now, with the latest 100 million, about 300 million in 25 years, which other than the Glazers, again, will be the lowest average ownership investment of any ownership group in the Premier League. And they're going to walk away with 3.5-4 billion off of that sort of 300-400 million total investment. So I wouldn't worry too much about them.
And I know we're going to wrap up by 11, but a big question that I think the one that most fans will be interested in out of all of this, it's probably the thing that affects or that interests fan the most, is transfers. Friend of the show, Ridley, here said, what are the board worried about when it comes to transfers, overspending, the Ndombele sign? And so when we post record revenues like this, I know PSR is such a big topic at these days. Does this sort of prove that we've essentially got loads of headroom for transfers again?
Yeah, I mean, from a PSR perspective, or squad cost ratio, as it's going to end up being replaced with in the Premier League, we have huge headroom, right? We have no concerns at all in terms of that. The one that's a little bit tighter is the UEFA squad cost ratio rules, whereby basically you can spend 70% of your revenue plus profit on player sales on amortization and wages. But even still on that, I've not looked at the numbers or updated them for a little while, but we had a huge amount of headroom on that relative to other clubs as well. So certainly from a financial rules perspective, there's no concerns at all. It's all about our own appetite for risk and our own sort of demand for success, and whether we're willing to do that. I mean, we are, you see relatively what Villa and Newcastle are doing in terms of ambition. If our owners were relatively as ambitious, we'd be seeing a significant improvement.
And we've got two opposing perspectives here. I wonder if you Wonder if you have a handle on which one of these is more likely to be true. Do you think this kind of shows that a takeover is on the horizon because it's clearly fruit picking, or alternatively, do you think this is why ENIC won't sell because they're basically essentially, posting record revenue year on year? Do you think both of those things can be true? Either of those things are true, or we don't really know at the moment?
I don't know. I think if you'd asked me in the summer, when they got rid of Levy and there was all the talk of they want to have a real go at it, I think I would have said I can see the Lewis family sticking around for a bit longer because I think they can see that there is still a huge bit of trajectory for the football club and more money that can be made. As we said, if they could get us to being in the Champions League again regularly, they could get these revenue numbers up to by 50, 100 million. That then increases their value accordingly, and they'll be able to sell the club for more. You've also got the whole sort of, will there ever be an NFL franchise coming over to London? Would that be based at Tottenham? Would that help grow so there's a big, there's still a lot of room for growth. However, I think maybe what might have opened their eyes, particularly with the pressure they're now getting, with Vivian getting bothered and all of those types of things, is they're going to have to spend a huge amount to get us competing again. And so I think that's the trade-off for them is, are they willing to invest the hundreds of millions, if not a billion, to get us to those levels again and then look to sell in the future? Or do they just go, oh, do you know what, this isn't actually for us. It's a lot harder running a football club than we realised. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, Colin's just asked the question, how much do we think Tottenham is worth? Yeah, I mean, it's probably somewhere 3.5 to 4 billion, Colin. But could quite easily get to closer to 4.5 if we were in the Champions League more regularly.
All right, we've got about 15 minutes left, guys. If you do have any questions on this, keep them coming because we will ask them more to Connor. I just want to go down this avenue for a little bit. Bundesliga is a completely different model to the Premier League in terms of ticket prices. Season ticket prices are, incomparably cheaper. Bayern Munich they have something to do with the fans, don't they? I always see it come back on Twitter. I don't know, have a full handle on it, but I know fans. I know that their chairman always talks about how the fans, they will never increase season ticket prices beyond a certain amount or something. I think they're part fan owned or something like that. Does Bayern Munich posting that? I know that they're a bit of a one case scenario because they win the league every year without fail, and almost. I know Leverkusen won it, but they are essentially a one club league, so they are their own sort of unique comparison. But does it show that we don't need to be charging these massively high ticket prices that we charge in order to compete at the top revenues?
Yes, is the short answer. I mean, look, everything helps, but our match day revenue, and we're sitting 9th in the table, is higher than Bayern Munich, who are 3rd, right? So we're at 150 million euros. They're 147. You're right. The German model is slightly different. There is a lot more. For some of the German clubs, I don't know whether this is specifically the case for Bayern Munich. Someone in the chat might know. There's fan ownership as well, and have part of the ownership, and definitely have the view that fans are a lot more important, and the price of tickets is a lot more important. And as you say, the season tickets are a fraction of what we're paying. But what Bayern Munich have obviously managed to do is commercial revenue is much more significant. Being the biggest club in Germany, the sponsors and all of that type of stuff, and obviously being more successful has brought more money in terms of the Champions League deals and all of that type of stuff, right? So, yeah, match day revenue, to be honest, is a bit of a fraction now. I mean, it's the smallest component of the 3 components that they use here. So, it does make little sense for us to increase ticket prices by the amount that they're being increased by every year. And with American owners, you probably a lot of American owners in the Premier League, I think you might see ticket prices go even higher because actually Premier League ticket prices are cheap relative to sort of what Americans pay for NFL and those types of things.
Yeah, definitely. And this is something which comes up a lot. I know there's a viral video of Simon Jordan talking about it at the moment, and about stadium debt, and he's mentioning that the reason why our hamstrung wage percentage is tied into the stadium debt. And Mike says here, was it the genius business plan to never pay off the stadium debt? So how does the stadium debt tie into all of this stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, just quickly on that point from Simon Jordan, respectfully, he's talking bollocks. Uh, there is, Daniel Levy, even himself, in uh, one of the meetings with the trust, I think it was, or maybe the fan advisory board, spoke about the fact that the debt doesn't have any covenants related to wages. The only covenant that it has, and he said himself there was covenant light, was on EBITDA, which, for the benefit of people watching who don't know what that is, it's basically the cash you generate from operations. And our EBITDA is always either the highest or the second highest in the Premier League. So I think Simon Jordan is trying to peddle that narrative to try and sort of protect his mate Daniel. It definitely is not the case that there would be any sort of prohibition. It would also not really be to the point we discussed before. It wouldn't, it's a different type of debt we've got now anyway. It's not bank debt. It's mostly debt in terms of sort of private placement bonds and stuff, which don't typically have those types of covenants. It also wouldn't be in the favour of the people who have lent the money to have that type of covenant, because, as we've said, wages are the best barometer of success, and obviously it'd be better for them that the football club's more successful, because then we'd be able to pay off the debt quicker, in theory. So it makes absolutely no sense at all. And the other thing I would say is Simon Jordan runs that narrative, but the club never actually have said that, and you'd think they would absolutely use that as an excuse for why they're doing it. And most fans would accept it if it was the truth. They go, okay, well, fair enough, we had to borrow some money for the stadium. So yeah, it's complete nonsense. The debt isn't in these numbers that Deloitte have released here, because they just focus on the revenue. It will be in the full accounts. On the specific question of, is it in the genius plan to pay off the debt? At the moment, we're not. So this is the interesting thing, right? We're not paying off that debt at all. We're just servicing the interest on it, which for me is fine, on the basis that actually it's cheap interest, and so I don't necessarily think we need to worry too much about paying it off quickly or anything like that. But they're not paying off the debt. They're buying up more property and more infrastructure, and we're still not getting what we want in terms of on-field stuff. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting what the ultimate plan ends up being with that debt. Yeah, it is early to mention EBITDA, Zelda.
And a couple of people here, which are two things which are on the same lines. They've transferred money to other associate companies. How about we mention that? Talking about ENIC, obviously, and talking about the hotels, which I know was a big thing under Daniel Levy. But I assume that even though Levy's gone, all of that stuff is still going ahead, right? All the plans for hotels, etc.
Well, funnily enough, on the hotel, they actually did, in the last fan advisory board minutes, they did actually say that they've paused that. Now, I don't know whether that's paused because, that often happens with building projects, and there's, something that's being renegotiated or re-agreed with the local council in terms of planning permission or something, right? But they did say they paused it. As far as I was aware, that was one of the, they wanted to have that in place with the Euros, with Tottenham being one of the stadiums that's hosting at the Euros. So I expect that to come back on board. But I mean, look, in terms of generally the point around what we've spent on property, I think it's worth reminding people, since ENIC have owned the football club, 1.6 billion pounds of cash has been spent on infrastructure and property, while still having the 800 million pound or so of debt on top of that for the stadium, whereas we've only spent about 600 million net over that time on players. So it sort of shows you where the priority has been for ENIC, and brings to life what we all talk about in terms of, great, all of that work you've done in terms of growing the club by spending on property, but they've spent a huge amount of the club's cash rather than any. And look, Eureka's right in terms of, obviously you would think that you build infrastructure, you get more revenue. That is obviously true, but I think what ENIC have done Eureka differently to a lot of other owners is they've taken cash out of the club, significant amounts of cash out of the club to fund that, right? Whereas, what you see in others, Everton, for example, with their stadium that they've just built, the owners themselves put in a lot of cash for that, or they finance it completely with debt. So there's different ways that you can do it, but I think we'd all agree we would have liked to have seen the ownership actually spend more on players relatively.
And please keep the questions coming in, guys. Please keep them coming in, because I've got to go at 11, but Connor's going to stick around if there's any more questions as well. So we've got a few more to go through here, so I'll keep going through them. This is an interesting topic which comes up a lot at the moment, obviously, in the wake of Daniel Levy leaving. What's going on with Daniel Levy's shares in the club? Because I've heard a few people mention this sort of idea that they might try and buy them out or something. Is that something which can happen?
You'd expect so. You'd expect. I think when it all come out, obviously that he was moved on. I think you'd expect that the Lewises would look to buy this 30% or so that Levy owns of ENIC, which then translates to sort of 25% of the club, so that they get full ownership. Because what you've got at the moment is, to the extent they actually do put in money, which obviously doesn't happen a lot, they're having to fund that fully, and Daniel Levy's not putting in any himself, and he's getting to benefit potentially from the value continuing to go up. So I think I think this is what you'll see before you. I think Rich is right. I think this is what you'll see before you see any sort of full takeover. I think you'll see them trying to buy Levy out of his bit.
And just a bit of a random question, but in general, we've got a lot more American investors coming into the Premier League at the moment. Obviously, high-profile ones like Chelsea, Bournemouth, and all kinds of other clubs have got American owners. And they often talk about, and we've seen it already with things like the Club World Cup and things like that, and obviously what's going on with the current World Cup, and FIFA are very much in the bed with America at the moment. I think that's very publicly commercial. Do you think we're going to start to see more sort of Americanization of the game? I mean, we've already seen in La Liga, the final being played in Saudi Arabia and things like that. Things which we'd never dream of in the Premier League at the moment. But things like doing away with season tickets and all kinds of things. But do you think, generally speaking, the game? Obviously, we know that American sports generate absolutely insane revenues. That dwarfs, sometimes even dwarf the Premier League. So, do we think that the Americanization of football is coming on the horizon?
Yeah, probably. As you say, you've started to see some of this sort of stuff with like the senior ticket concessions, and obviously the trust and other football clubs are doing a lot of work around Save Our Seniors. So, and those types of things. And you're right. I mean, season ticket holders, to be honest, well, at the moment for Tottenham, they're a benefit, because otherwise we wouldn't be filling the stadium. But generally, when a football club is doing well, they become a bit of a nuisance, to be honest, right? Because one, they're more likely to have stronger opinions on the way that the club is run and what the football club is doing. Two, they don't spend as much as sort of tourists or day trippers will, and as you say, that American model of having it being a real day out at the NFL, for example, and you buy all the merchandise and all of that type of stuff on top. So yeah, I agree that Yank owners don't like season tickets. I think you've started to see, as you say, La Liga, for example, playing games abroad. I think at the moment they're doing that because they're trying to close the gap on the Premier League and how popular Premier League is. So I don't think the Premier League will rush into that, but they will have the excuse now, won't they? Because what they'll say is, look, in order for the Premier League to remain competitive with these other leagues, we really need to do this as well. So it wouldn't shock me if in the next 5 years we do start to see some games abroad.
And Todd Boehly, obviously, he's made a big wave in the Premier League since he's his owner, and he seems to have changed the landscape slightly. What The word that I hear now, I never used to hear before Todd Bowley was around was amortization. And he sort of he sort of stretched out deals for like 10 years, hasn't he, or something, like wages and stuff. What kind of change? Since Todd Bowley has became a massive headline stealing owner, what kind of changes financially? How has that changed like the transfers, wages landscape of the Premier League? Because he seems to have made a bit of a splash.
Yeah, I think what they managed to do is they managed to get ahead of some loopholes before they've ended up being closed, right? So yeah, the big one that they did was the long player contracts, which basically
So
meant
is that all
before the
closed off
loophole.
now? Basically, is that all?
Yeah. So now the maximum time that you can amortize a player's transfer over is 5 years. So you buy a player for 50 million, 10 million pounds a year amortization hits your accounts as a charge. Whereas before that, when Todd Bowley bought in the 8 years, it'd be spread over 8 years. So basically, you'd get the benefit of spreading it over that longer period. But yeah, they've closed that loophole. Obviously, the other big one that they've used, which could be used for the Premier League rules, but not the European rules, was the sort of intra-group sales of assets. So they sold their hotel to themselves. They've sold their women's team to themselves. Villa copied that with a women's team as well. It's all basically to artificially cook your books so that you can spend more and you can support how much you've been spending, because obviously they've spent ridiculous amounts on transfers. But yeah, those loopholes are being closed, and particularly from a European rules perspective, that's the reason why both Villa and Chelsea got into hot water with UEFA.
Right, I got to go, but you're gonna stick around for a little bit, Connor. Answer any more questions that we got.
Yeah. I'll do another 5 minutes or so, just to answer some other questions. And yeah, if anyone else has got
Just to
some
keep people
questions,
posted, I know you mentioned at the beginning, but when do Tottenham post their official accounts generally?
yeah, it will be. Well, it's any time up to the 31st of March, but we normally basically do it at the deadline. So yeah, it will be end of March. You'll see
As
that.
with most
You'll
things
see
that
that come
Tottenham
through.
do, so we save it for the deadline.
Exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yes. Yeah. So
Right, see you in a bit,
yeah.
guys.
See you later, Bill. Thank you, mate. And yeah, just as a quick reminder on this one, yeah, thank you for the feedback, Colin. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind subscribing and liking the video, just helps us in terms of coming up the algorithm. That would be massively appreciated. I've got a couple of extra questions here. So we've had this one from Dominic or Domenico. Any potential buyer of Tottenham would have to renegotiate the interest on our debt, and that could be an obstacle to selling to new owners. I can't say for certain because obviously I've not seen the terms of the agreements, but this would surprise me, to be honest. Whether this needed to be renegotiated in the event of a sale. You do sometimes have change of control type stuff on debt, but again, it's not something that would necessarily be in the interest in this type of event. So yeah, it would surprise me. And then Eureka again has raised this point about ENIC having taken cash out of the club. The infrastructure is still owned by Tottenham, not some ENIC affiliated company. Now, it's a good point because the dividends have been, as we said, there was only 1 year. I think they paid a very, very minor dividend, which was about 7 million or something like that. But I suppose the point is they have been massive beneficiaries of being able to use the club's cash at the detriment of using it on transfers and the things that we care about in terms of on-pitch stuff, in terms of building up that infrastructure, right? And as I said, the way that they've done that is very different to most other football club owners, right? So Everton, as the example was earlier, they did, and Everton didn't use a single penny of the club's cash to build their new stadium. They used external debt, or the owners themselves put money in on the basis that the owners thought to themselves, if we put some money in, we're going to get some return, right? So this is the difference. And there's been a huge opportunity cost, right, for Tottenham and us as Tottenham fans in terms of the money that they've decided to take out to spend on that infrastructure now, and at the same time haven't paid off any of the debt. So we continue to have that. Now, as I say, I do agree with your point here. It's like a mortgage. It's at super low interest rates, and so we don't necessarily need to rush to be paying off that debt. But this is where you expect to see more ownership investment for me. I think, I used the example the other day because Brighton released their accounts. Tony Bloom, Brighton's owner, is seen as a very, very shrewd football owner. And he has put more money into Brighton than ENIC have put into Tottenham total. And obviously ENIC have been there for 25 years, including what ENIC purchased the club for. So, I think it's definitely, without doubt, the case that ENIC need to be putting more money into the football club if they want to actually compete with what the rest of the Premier League is doing. And this is going to be really hard to see. I think it's coming up really small, but you can see this on Kieran Maguire's Twitter. He's gone back all the way to the start of the Premier League and looked at the underlying profits and losses, right, of all of the various clubs that have been in the Premier League. And it won't surprise you that Tottenham are there at the bottom of this graph, because this is listed by sort of loss through to profit. £180 million of profit they've made over that time. Chelsea are the complete opposite, a sort of 1.2 billion loss over that time. And actually Chelsea's would be even worse, because this doesn't include the impact of them selling hotels and women's teams to themselves. And so, what this shows to me is Tottenham has been run in a way that is very, very atypical for a football club. ENIC have run it in the way that you see typical businesses being run, where they're trying to make regular profit. But I think we need to just remind everyone that that is not the model that most owners take for football clubs, because what owners for football clubs are looking to do is basically grow the size of the club, and then that's when they'll make their money. ENIC have sort of done both, right? So they've restricted what they've had to spend or what they've had to invest themselves, and they're still going to walk away with that huge return. And so, I think we all can't wait for the day that they move on, I'm sure. This point from Alpesh: club has cash flow issues, thinking currently paying off previous transfers. So Tottenham historically have always been top in terms of the amount of cash that they've actually held themselves. And as I said, spent a huge amount of the cash that we could have spent on things like transfers on paying off property. It's common for Premier League clubs to have cash flow issues. That's the reasons why their owners have to put in money off them, right? As I said, the Kroenkes have put in over 300 million. Liverpool's owners, not in last year but the year before, had to inject over £100 million of cash to get them competing. And the viewpoint that their owners take, which ENIC obviously haven't taken, is that we're going to speculate to accumulate. We'll put in some cash now, but the benefits to us later, when we come to look to sell the club, will be much more significant. And so I think this is something us as Tottenham fans get sort of focused on, but it's completely normal for football clubs to have cash flow issues, as it were, because actually the model should be for a football club that you're making your money when you sell it, and you're investing in the short term. This is a good point that people have spoken about this at length. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think we probably all feel it a little bit if we're not using Fire Sticks or whatever else, but having to pay out for Sky, TNT, Amazon Prime when that was in, and everything else, it does feel a matter of time before we start to see a Netflix style model. And I'm surprised, to be honest, the Premier League haven't done it already. I think probably the reason the Premier League haven't done it yet is because, to be honest, they do make a huge amount of money from the TV deals that they negotiate with Sky and the likes. You would argue they would make more, but that would come with a upfront investment. Setting up that Netflix style model would cost a huge amount of money. And so, and obviously they've got to recruit the right expertise to do so. So it's something that's going to take a bit of time. And I think this is another point why they haven't done it yet. They need to get rid of this 3 p.m. blackout if they're going to do it. And you're right, it's absolutely balmy that, I'm a Tottenham season ticket holder, so I'm spending sort of 1,200 quid on that, then spending all of this money on all of those platforms, and I can't actually, I actually can't watch every Tottenham game without streaming one. So Yeah, and look, agree with this. I think ENIC want the return without actually making the investment. So yeah, it's interesting. Rich makes a good point here. You know, Arsenal have run there. I think the difference between us, look, Man City and Chelsea are sort of in their own place, right? In terms of um, you know, they've obviously cheated. They've artificially inflated the value by injecting huge amounts before the rules are in place. I think Arsenal and Liverpool are the models which are more similar to ours. But I think what both of those clubs do that we haven't done is they take those risks at the right time, right? You know, I think Arsenal's wage bill, as I say, is sort of 100 million more than ours. Liverpool's is even more than that, more than ours. There's a sort of 200 million more than ours. Their wage to revenue ratio is 60%. They're willing to take those risks and they're willing to inject cash at the right time because they realise, you know, back to that point earlier of speculating to accumulate, they know the right time to do that. And so, and that's coming through in terms of the way that they've been able to compete overall. I think that is basically all of the sort of main questions I've had. Thank you everyone in the chat for getting involved. I'm going to wrap up now. Please like the channel, as I said earlier. Sorry, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And Eureka is right. I get this comment a lot about missing the TV from the wall. I did have a TV up there. This is the sort of second room that I use as an office, but my father-in-law gave us that TV and then decided he wanted to take it back. But anyway, long story. But yeah, thank you guys. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see you on Sunday. We've got a show with Paul O'Keefe where less financing, more transfers. God forbid we actually do a transfer. I think everyone's forgotten we're in a transfer window right now. And so, yeah, we'll see how that goes with Paul O'Keefe. But thanks, everyone. Come on, you Spurs.